now that we've actually been playing with fonts, we've been playing with colors and font sizes, and we've started playing with how making things look more like a web page. If I go back to the style guide we have right now, let's reload the one in Chrome. We're looking more and more like a web page. We're starting to see things kind of pop in, something that looks like a navigation bar, something that looks like header, something that looks like a paragraph. More and more we're starting to sort of take shape. And this is where really things are really going to get exciting as we ramp forward. I do want to show you an example. The next portion of this section is we're going to talk about padding. And really to understand how padding works is we're going to look at the relationship between the content itself, the word, the box, the div, the text, and how padding and how margin works. Really, how padding works is if we're looking at, think of a word, or we're looking at, let's say, our navigation element here that I did, that paragraph. In order to create spacing, we want to be able to work and have things fit snugly into these inherently virtual boxes. So what padding does is it takes the edge of, let's say, the paragraph tag and gives you some space inside of it. So let me look at this. Here would be, think of it as this is the edge of our paragraph tag. Here's where we actually made it nice and black. Padding is inside of it versus margin, it's outside of it. Let's talk about how padding works. I'm going to go back to my Sublime text editor, and let's work on the example of the I created in the last section for that ID called nav. Let's pretend to make some imaginary padding here. I'm going to go into nav, and padding usually works within a div, a CSS. We can actually use it in a lot of places. So here's where we're actually going to begin to experiment with it. So I'm going to play with, there are 4 attributes in padding, and there's padding top. And again, a little repetitive, padding bottom, semicolon, padding left, padding right. Looks a little bit repetitive. And truth being, in the further next chapter, we'll actually look at consolidating these. We'll actually, as we're ready to go to production, to streamline things. But for right now, as we're working, we're just going to start adjusting things. Because I might want to change things. I might want to actually adjust how we look. So why don't we say, what if there's 20 pixels on top? So here you go. There's 20 pixels to the top of this. So here's my padding top at work. How about we say it's 10 pixels to the bottom? So now I have a padding at the bottom. And what if I actually do 45 pixels? Why 45? I have no idea. I reload it. Now I have a space of 45. Again, my navigation bar, wink, wink, is actually in between the left and the top. If it was to spill over to the right, I'd probably want to have padding on the other side as well. I really won't see it until I add multiple links. But this is really the beginning of me experimenting with the page. This is now I have padding inside of it. It's really, really easy. One of the other things that I can do is, let's say I decide that I want padding uniform. So I can actually add the generic attribute of padding and say padding is 30 pixels. I can actually delete this. I save it and I reload again. Now padding is uniform across the whole thing. That looks half bad. I don't think I would actually use 30 pixels. Maybe we might do something like 20. Well, not the prettiest navigation bar, but you know what? I think it'll work. There you go. That looks more like a navigation bar. One thing that I do want to look at is I want to be able to, let's say, add padding into some of these links. Well, here's where actually we can look at in terms of how sometimes CSS works. Padding works really great on paragraph. It really works great on some of these global tags. So let's say if I wanted to add generic padding to the overall page, I can say padding is 40 pixels all around. I reload the page, and now that there's nice snuggly space around the entire page. So let's reload the page itself. And you notice the pages are still looking pretty good. One of the things that we're going to do here, and I'm going to zoom these back down to normal, and this is where we begin to see some slight differences. They're not that much differences here because we're looking at Safari and Chrome. So why don't we do Firefox? What we'll do is copy this URL. We'll put it here. And again, very slight variations. In this case, on the Mac, most of the browsers are pretty good. If I were to do this on the PC, IE is notorious for changing the way padding works, especially if I have fixed widths. We'll talk about fixed widths in the next chapter. But for really fluid pages, it's one of the things to be careful about in terms of how we want to set padding to everything. Used to be about 3 to 4 years ago, if I were to do this example and have put padding and margins within these 3 browsers, things would have been slightly different. All browsers are getting really close to accepting the same amount of CSS and the type of CSS we're using. So that's a really good plus for us. So again, padding is great for fluidity and sort of nice space inside. Now we're going to look at how we actually get space in between different elements. So let's say, how do I get space above this nav and this detailed header? That's going to be a margin, and that's coming up next.